Thank you for joining us today at IFFGD's 2021 Virtual Advocacy event. Today, we are focusing on educating patients and caregivers on how best to navigate the social media world. With us today is Austin Chiang, the founding president of the Association for Healthcare Social Media. Dr. Chiang, thank you for being with us here today. Can you share just a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Well, I am a gastroenterologist by training. I'm actually an advanced endoscopist. I work at Jefferson Health, a teaching hospital here in Philadelphia. And yeah, so I originally grew up in Southern California, moved abroad to Taiwan when I was 10, and then came back to the US for college, med school, and beyond. Was at Duke for undergrad, was at Columbia for medical school and internal medicine training, and then went to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston for GI training, and that's where I also got my master's of public health, and did my final year of training in advanced endoscopy here in Philadelphia. So that's my career kind of in a nutshell.
Wow, that's a lot of traveling. You definitely can relate to people from all over the world,
Yeah.
and have lived in many different places. So, what made you become such a force in social media for gastroenterology? What caused sort of stemmed that interest in you?
Yeah, I always, I guess early on in my training, I recognized that patients were not receiving information only from me as a source, but rather being exposed to so much through media and social media, and so I wanted to understand how they were getting, medical information. So I actually spent some time at ABC News initially, a couple years ago, trying to understand who was vetting the medical news and who was deciding which studies were getting reported on the evening news and whatnot. So in that process, I saw that they were using social media at the time to host weekly discussions. And from there, I decided to move my own social media presence, primarily on Twitter at the time, from a personal one to a professional one. And I've always been a huge fan of social media. I kind of grew up in this era, from the MySpace days to like Friendster, and Facebook came out my freshman year in college. So I really kind of saw it, explode. And from Twitter, I eventually shifted my presence onto Instagram, and then over the years onto YouTube and TikTok. And I just, wanted to learn how to use all of these different platforms to convey medical knowledge. And I've learned that each platform has a different kind of purpose and a different way of communicating. And through this whole experience, I've also been able to interact with our GI societies and help our different GI societies with their social media efforts. And I've learned a lot along the way through that. And also gotten to know a lot of other social media gurus, so to speak, in other fields, and have been able to kind of take that knowledge and apply it to our field, and to help put out more information about gut health and digestive health. And that's really how it all started. So it's been about 6 or 7 years, not 7 years in the making, and to see it now come to a point where I think everyone is so receptive of it and really using it for so many different reasons, whether it's to build their practice or to educate others or to network with one another in the field, I think is really, really amazing. But it wasn't always that way. When I first
Yes.
started, it was a little bit rough, and there was a
Mhm.
little bit of ridicule here and there. But I've just gotten used to, seeing how it just takes time for people to get used to embracing social media. And especially in this day and age, I think it's very apparent that social media really plays a huge role in everything that from our social political landscape to determining how businesses do, etc. And so it's really been quite a journey.
I actually remember. So IFFGD has always been, has leaned on social media since the inception, has tried to do a lot of social media around medical conferences as well. And I remember particularly several years ago, we were at, I believe it was Digestive Disease Week,
Mm.
and IFFGD was twittering or tweeting through the whole event. And we were really proud of the number of tweets we were able to get out. And my social media manager at the time sort of said, but man, who is this Austin guy? He's like blown us away. I'm actually retweeting his stuff because it's so good. And you had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds more tweets than we did. And we thought we were, really doing a great job with it. And so we ended up retweeting a lot of your stuff during that event. And it was sort of at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to find this guy. He's great. He's really and truly doing a great service here. And so I think we connected several years ago
Yeah.
as we sort of tracked you down and and really have been impressed by your ability to keep science within a very social platform. So, Austin, when people are looking and searching for medical information on social media, what are some things that they should be looking for? Now, obviously, if they know they can go to your handle, right? They know that they're going to get good information. And we know that you are backed by all the GI societies as well as IFFGD. We endorse what you do because we know that you have really great science out there. But what about others or even people in different disease states outside of GI? What should they be looking for in social media when it comes to medical information?
It's very difficult because sometimes, there's information that is coming from the professional community that is well-intentioned that sometimes can also be misinterpreted. So I think that first and foremost, just from a very broad perspective, just making sure that the people that you're following actually have appropriate credentials, I think is step number one, which is sometimes hard to discern. I think another key point is to follow a bunch of different people so that you can kind of cross-reference and see if the information sort of makes sense and if everyone is sort of discussing it in the same context. I think that it's also kind of important to understand if you truly are trying to understand the science of it, really understanding like which references are reliable sources, are reputable sources, which medical journals are reputable, because not all of them are necessarily reputable, and how kind of the basics of how to interpret a study, and whether or not the study was a recent one, whether or not the study involved like a placebo arm to the trial, for instance. It can become very, very granular. But I think that the key thing is that cross-referencing different sources, different people, different experts, I think is really key, because that way at least you can see, is everyone coming to the same conclusion, or is there a lot of disagreement around something? And the other things are just that, if a claim sounds too good to be true, often it is. And so if you have any inkling of a doubt, I think that, digging a little deeper and doing a little more research can be really helpful.
Fantastic. Great advice. What about support groups? So in this area of the pandemic, right, we're seeing a lot of people that are reaching out to support groups. Many years ago, they were held like in hospitals or community centers, and people got together and they talked. There's a lot more support groups now on social media, tons of them. In every possible disease state, people are able to connect with others through social media, but sometimes that's not always a good thing. And so what should people look for if they're wanting to join a social media group, whether it be like a Twitter support group or a Facebook support group or something of that nature? What are some things that they should be thinking about as they begin that search?
Yeah, I think that again, trying to identify like if there are experts present, if the people who are posting in those support groups are citing evidence and are actually citing their sources, and which sources they're actually citing. I have seen or been part of Facebook support groups that have also just been have gotten very messy. And if there's a lot of contention and controversy, I think sometimes that tells you that maybe there's an area within medicine there that is a little bit that may need further checking, fact checking. And you know, bottom line is, if you're unsure with what you're hearing or learning about in a support group, you either, you know, cross-reference that by searching elsewhere, or speaking to your doctor and asking whether or not that situation applies to you. And I think that's another key thing, is that a lot of what is discussed sometimes may not apply to a certain individual, because everyone's clinical situation is different. And just because it's working for someone else or is appropriate for someone else doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right option for you, or that it applies to you. But yeah, I think it's very difficult to kind of discern which Facebook groups are good and which ones aren't. But I think that, you know, citing evidence, citing the experts, and kind of, you know, I think that any doctor would be happy to sort of say, if you were to come to them and say, is this a reputable source? Is what I'm hearing actually accurate? And even if the doctor doesn't know what that, you know, isn't familiar with that topic, at least they can say, is that a reputable source? They can actually kind of help you out with figuring out whether or not that's true, or whether or not that journal is actually respected in the field. So, you know, I think that's a really key thing, because interestingly, I get approached a lot with people trying to show me studies from journals that are not so reputable, and or I read through the study and it's really not that solid of a study. And you know, to most people out there, it's really difficult to see. A lot of these journals have fancy names, and you know, it sounds very legitimate, but often it's not.
Right. The age-old adage of you can really truly prove anything you want to, right?
Yeah.
And write things any way you want to do that, and making sure. So my next question was going to be to ask you, what are some characteristics of a very positive support group? And so I think you may have answered that, but I'm going to give you a chance to see if there was anything else you wanted to add to, you know, what sort of characteristics would make sort of a positive support group that would be good for patients with GI illness.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think support groups are fantastic, first of all. I think that they're really important in patient care. Um, I think that if, from a patient's perspective, if I were to be on a support group, it would be really helpful to see other patients kind of qualify their statements, and recognize that not everything that they're recommending or trying to push on there is, you know, it necessarily applies to everybody. And so, you know, allowing that wiggle room, I think, is really important. Um, and just a respectful environment. You know, I think some people have very strong opinions. So often you may not know in the support group whether or not someone is well-intentioned, or if they truly, you know, have a certain condition, or truly have an experience to share, or if it's totally fabricated. You know, that's sometimes difficult to tell. So yeah, those qualifying statements, backing things up with evidence, you know, keeping things cordial on there, I think is important. I've seen a lot of, you know, support groups unravel pretty quickly because it gets into these arguments that, you know, if we all just took a step back, I think it would be a much more positive environment.
Okay, that sort of leads me to the next thing, is what are some red flags? So if you're out there looking for some support groups, what are some red flags that might tell you that this may not be sort of the best venue for you to go for a support group?
Yeah, I think that, you know, in addition to a lot of the things that I've said already about, like, you know, making sure that things are evidence-based, and that there is, you know, there are sources that are cited. I would also say if there are a lot of products being pushed, that's probably another red flag, because you just don't know, you know, especially whoever the moderators are in the Facebook group, you just don't know if they have certain ulterior motives. And I mean, this is something that is becoming increasingly more common in the medical space, is that there are a lot of different products that are being pushed, and you just don't know whether or not they're truly recommended, or if there's any, you know, actual science behind that. And if there's, again, very kind of outlandish or outrageous claims being made that are kind of like bordering on propaganda, if you feel like you sense that someone's trying to shove an idea, down you, I think that it's worth reevaluating and making sure that this is actually the appropriate support group for you.
True. Fantastic. And so just to summarize, just the key factors in finding a support group, some of the things that you mentioned, making sure that we're getting cited credible sources.
Hmm.
These are top tier journals with high impact ratings that are respected in the medical community. You can ask your doctor if this source is credible or not. Also, feel free to reach out to IFFGD and we'd be happy to look through those sources as well and consult with our gastroenterologist friends like Dr. Chiang about these sorts of things. Another thing was looking for outlandish comments, things that are too good to be true, likely are, as you mentioned. That's another key factor, and that promises aren't being made of some sort, because really in medicine you can't make promises. It's a science, and so I think that was another one of the key points. Also, I think you mentioned about positivity and people being positive towards each other and not tearing each other down, not a lot of arguing or harmful comments being made within the support group to one another, as key things to remember. And then, of course, the one red flag I think that most of us will agree on is products. If a support group is trying to sell you supplements or some sort of miracle product, then sometimes you have to wonder, it may not be true, but you have to wonder whether or not there's some financial gain coming back to someone because of that, because obviously it then becomes more of like a marketing platform. And we definitely want to be very careful about what we're allowing ourselves to believe and to take in to our minds. Is there anything I missed on those key points? I was trying to summarize to make sure that I got it right, because that was a wealth of information there.
Yeah, I think that it just takes a little bit of a kind of detective-like mindset going into trying to find, a good support group and good resources online. I've seen some instances that have been very subtle, like, sometimes the product pushing is not very obvious, and it comes in the form of an Amazon affiliate link or something like that, and you just have to be very aware of like where how some people might be gaining financially from some product pushing, from some of this product endorsement. And so yeah, just be careful out there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking time to educate us today on the best way to navigate these different Facebook and Twitter support groups. And I'm sure before long, we'll probably have TikTok ones and Instagram ones as well when someone figures out how to do that. But these are wonderful points that I think kind of carry through all the different social media platforms.
Yes.
And for those of you just joining us, we've been chatting with Dr. Austin Chiang, who happens to be the founder and president of the Association for Healthcare Social Media, something that has been very desperately needed. And Dr. Chiang saw that need, joined with some colleagues, and created this wonderful nonprofit organization. Today, we've been talking to him about the best ways to navigate social media for support and education. You will find more information about this on the advocacy event page. We will also, at the end of this video, have all of Dr. Austin's handles in case you want to follow him on any of the social media platforms, as well as IFFGD's social media handles as well. If you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to reach out to us at advocacy@iffgd.org, and we'd be happy to continue this conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Chiang. This has been very, very helpful for us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.